Hey guys, today I am here showing you how I cook my spaghetti. I typically cook my spaghetti several different ways. Sometimes I make spaghetti and meatball, but today I decide to do it very quick. I didn't have much time, so I wanted to make something quick and simple. This spaghetti is more of an island style spaghetti. It's very simple. And as you can already see, I have my pot, it's filled with water, and I turn the stove on so it can start boiling. Next, as you can see, I have oil. This is the oil that I use. I do not use vegetable oil. I am going to add about 1 tablespoon of oil into the pot. And the reason I do that is because I do not want the noodles to stick together. You can either add oil or butter, but I typically just add oil to it. And once I add the oil, then I will add salt. Okay, the salt is to flavor the noodles. You don't want your noodles to taste fresh. So I typically add 1 teaspoon of salt into my water just so it can have that taste to it. It's not going to be salty or anything, but it will take away that fresh taste from the noodle. Okay. So once I have all of that in, then I'll let my water come to complete boil, and from there I will add my noodles. But meanwhile, I just get everything prepared. Okay, next I add thyme just to give it that nice herb taste. I always add thyme to all my food, and I think it's an island thing. We add thyme to everything. So I'm just rinsing it right now, and it's added. And also with the thyme, I sometime I will add a scotch pepper into it, but as you can see my water is coming to a boil, so what I will do next is get my spaghetti prepared so I can add into the water. I'm just struggling right now to open up the bag, and this is the brand that I use. I get it from Sam's. There's two different brands that I use from Sam's, and they didn't have the other one I typically use. So I take the noodles and I snap it in half. Reason I do that, you get more noodles, and plus my son, he loves spaghetti, so I don't want the noodles to be super long and he start choking and things like that. So I usually snap it in half, and I will layer different position because I don't want it to stick together. Noodles tend to stick together. Okay, so I got all the noodles in, and then I will get a scotch pepper. Like I said, sometimes I add a scotch pepper to it, and I rinse it and add it to the water. I don't let it overcook so it's not spicy, but I do like the flavor and the smell that it it's hard to explain, but it give it a nice flavor. Not overly spicy. Okay, so I'm just stirring everything up to make sure my noodles are not sticking together, and this is something I will constantly do throughout the video. And cover it up, let it boil. And this spaghetti really does not take a long time to cook. It's very simple and quick. And for meat, I add hot dog or sausage. So island style, we typically add hot dog or sausage. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with any of if anyone making this type of spaghetti, but we typically add hot dog or sausage. And I thought I had sausage, but I do not. Okay, so I'm just stirring it. Like I mentioned, I will continue stirring the noodles throughout the video to make sure they're not sticking together. Okay. All right. And once I'm done with stirring, then I will start cutting up my hot dogs. And I use the Frank beef hot dog. Okay. So next I am going to cut my hot dogs. I have 4 hot dogs. So I'm going to cut them in small little pieces. As you can see, I'm just chopping them in small little pieces to add to the boiling water. So that will cook the hot dog. And I try not to cut the hot dogs up too big. I do a nice size. And as you can see, the water is completely boiling and I add my hot dogs to it. So the hot dog is going to cook within the same water and it will also flavor your noodles. My son wanted to see the pepper. He thought it was a piece of carrot. Okay, so next I am going to get my onions prepared. So I cut it in half. I don't use the whole thing. And then I start chopping them. I don't chop it too small. And once I'm done, put it to the side. And now I am going to take a look to make sure that my noodles are almost cooked. And as I can tell, it's almost done. And my hot dogs are looking good. All right, so my spaghetti is fully cooked. The next thing that I do is drain out the water from the spaghetti, and I typically like to run cold water just to stop the cooking process. So as you can see, I have my water running and I went to get the pot so I can pour it into my drainer. There you go, the spaghetti, and you then the pot also went along with it. Okay, so I would just run the cold water on the spaghetti for about, I'll say 30 seconds up to a minute. And while I'm running the cold water, I take my tongue and then I stir it to make sure that the water is running in between all the noodles. Now it's time to do that seasoning sauce. So I add about 1 tablespoon of oil, 1 tablespoon to 1.5 tablespoons of oil. It all depends on how oily you want your spaghetti. So 1 tablespoon to 1.5 tablespoons is just perfect for me. And I'm just using the lid of the top of the actual oil to do my measurement. It's about a tablespoon anyways. So as you can see, I did it 3 times, so 1 tablespoon and a half. Okay, so as my oil get hot, I will get my spaghetti sauce. So spaghetti sauce is something that I use. I prefer to use that, but you can use tomato paste and build it up with water. But I like to use spaghetti sauce since it already have the liquid texture and I don't have to add too much water. If you use tomato paste, you will have to add water to give it that look of a spaghetti sauce. So as you can see, I add 1 cup of spaghetti sauce, and I stir. Usually I will add chopped tomatoes, and also I will fry my garlic into the oil, but it completely went over my head, so I just added to the spaghetti sauce with the oil to let it cook down into that. And I add about 1 teaspoon of garlic. So my garlic is cooking, and you guys wondering, why am I using the tongue to cook my spaghetti? And I find it to be the easiest way to stir your spaghetti, to pick it up. It's just perfect. And we all know how slippery spaghettis are. They tend not to stay on the spoon. They're spaghetti spoon, but okay. So my next season, I am adding right now. I typically add half of the top of the top of the cap. I add half of that season into it, and then I add a half a teaspoon of black pepper. Next, I'll add, I'll say 1.5 teaspoons of onion powder, and you can never go wrong with too much onion powder. I ran out of garlic powder, so that's the reason I'm not adding. And then my last season is Maggi, and I'll say I'll add 1 teaspoon of Maggi into my sauce. Okay, now you will see the different texture of the sauce. After adding all the season, the sauce did get thickened up, and you can see that it's no longer as watery. It's more of a thick texture. So I just like to mix in my seasons together, and once everything is mixed in, then I will take just a little bit of the tongue and dab it on my palm just to make sure that my sauce do have enough season. At the end, I add mustard. I add half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of mustard, just regular mustard. You don't have to, it's optional, but I like to add it just to give it that little extra flavor that I'm looking for. And then I just stir, mix everything together. This process, I also typically add chopped green pepper, sweet green pepper, but I do not have any, so I am skipping that process out. But in the sauce, I will usually add that into it and let it cook down. But since I don't have any, then I'm just going to stick to onions, chopped onions. Okay, as I'm tasting, just to make sure it's good. You want the flavor to be to your liking. If you feel like it's lacking season, you can always add more, but never start with too much so your sauce is not salty. And if it does get a little salty to your liking, you can always add a little bit of water to offset the flavor. But when you add a little bit of water, you have to make sure the sauce will thicken up so your spaghetti is not just sitting in water. Now I'm just adding my spaghetti, my noodles to my sauce. Okay, now you're going to see the importance of me using this tongue. It's actually so much better to pick up the noodles and to mix every sauce in. So every noodles will actually be covered with sauce. And if I was using a spoon, it will be much harder. And I do not have the spaghetti spoon. Well, at least at this home, I don't have the spaghetti spoon with me. And now I'm taking the pepper so it does not burst and make the spaghetti spicy. As you can see, I'm just mixing in the spaghetti within the sauce to make sure every noodles is fully coated. I have so much light in my kitchen that it's ridiculous. Sometimes it doesn't really balance with what I'm trying to do when I'm recording. So I like to move around the camera to see if I can get the best light or less light, and it doesn't work. But I'm continue mixing in my noodles within the sauce. As you can see, the noodles are changing color, so it's no longer the white color. It's starting to get the tomato color, the spaghetti sauce color. So it's like a reddish color, and that's what you want for all your noodles to be covered. So I'm cooking and I'm multitasking. So if you see that I stop, it's because I'm having conversation and I'm multitasking. I'm doing more than one thing at a time. My son is crying in the background. Okay, so just continue stirring. You want to keep doing that until every noodles is actually covered. And like I mentioned, this is the quickest way to make spaghetti if you're in a rush or it's getting too late and you don't want to cook heavy food. This is a quick way of actually doing it. Don't get me wrong, I love making spaghetti and meatball, but this is also as delicious as spaghetti and meatball. Well, at least in my house, it's very popular. And this is an island typical way of making spaghetti. At my auntie restaurant, this is exactly how they make their spaghetti. Okay, so next I am going to add my onions. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes I add green sweet pepper, but I do not have any. So I'm just going to stick to onions. So I'm adding my chopped onions in there so I can let it cook in there for about 10 minutes. You don't want your onions to be too raw. So I'm just adding that in. And I added a lot of onions because we do love onions in this house. And once my onions is in, the next thing I'm going to do is give you guys a look. As you can see, that's how it's looking. You just want to let it cook down for about 10 minutes. Okay, it's all done. So now I am going to share the spaghetti. I'm just adding it to the plate just so you guys can really take a look and see. I tried to insert a photo, but it's not allowing me to. So you guys not going to be able to see a photo of the actual spaghetti, but you do see the video. Just adding some onions and some hot dogs into it. Alright, so this is the plate of the final product. So this is how the spaghetti